Is there such thing as used to be a psychopath? No, you're always one. You're born that way, and you can't help it. Okay, because remember, your brain doesn't function properly. It's not connected. The lobe, the parietal lobes, and the frontal lobe, and the amygdala, those things aren't connecting properly. They're not functioning properly. So there's no way to fix that. No way to fix the behavior. No way to fix that way of thinking. No way to inject feelings into those brains, or to the ability to feel emotion like empathy into those brains. People that are psychopaths, there's no way to fix that. So there's no way somebody used to be. Once you are, or if you are, you are. Do the pupils of psychopaths dilate or constrict when they see fear? Good question, because they dilate. We know that from scientific studies that have become available in the last 3 or 4 years. So it's something semi-new. When a psychopath sees fear, that's one of the only things that flips their switches, makes them go, yeah. So their eyes dilate. When you and I see something that we like or that we're interested in, or a person, if I see my wife, my eyes dilate a little bit because I love her and she loves me, and that's my person. When you see your person, your husband, your wife, your boyfriend, girlfriend, your eyes will dilate a little bit because you're interested in that person. That's your person, right? Or if you see a puppy, or you see a little kitten or something, then they'll dilate a little bit because you think it's adorable, and your eyes will dilate because your brain is trying to take in as much information as it possibly can about whatever it's looking at when that happens, and you get those feelings because the light is better, the focus is better. It's trying to see all it can see, your brain, through your eyes. As corny as that sounds, but that's what's happening. That's why that they do that. Now, the psychopath, same thing. The only expression they really identify with or recognize over and over and very quickly is fear. They see that and go, I know what that is. I know what that is, my thing, because they like that. So I won't go off on a big psychopath jag. Okay, what is the difference between psychopaths and narcissists? Back to the psychopath jag. All psychopaths are narcissists, but not all narcissists are psychopaths. Very important. Remember that. All psychopaths are narcissists, but not all narcissists are psychopaths. Now, you can have a clinical narcissist, a hardcore narcissist, who will actually get right up there next to being a psychopath, really close. There's nothing wrong with their amygdala. In some cases, they do have a little bit of empathy for people or situations or little animals and things. And they're not a psychopath. They're not a clinical psychopath. But the clinical narcissist can be dangerous, because not all, like, for example, a lot of people think that they think psychopaths are brilliant. They think they're really smart and all that. Some of them, like I've said on here before, are just idiots, just a doofus. They just happen to be psychopaths because that part of the brain isn't working properly, the amygdala, which is in the limbic system, or part of the limbic system. So in a hardcore narcissist, you'll see them treat their family, their children, like they mean nothing. They'll say, oh, the children are okay, and they're not okay. They're not keeping an eye on them. They're not making sure that they're safe, those kind of things. And you'll hear the children say as they grow older, it's all about you, isn't it, Mom? It's all about you, or it's always all about my dad. Always, everything is about him. And you think, well, it's the kids talking about their parents. Listen to that. Listen to that when you hear it. Nothing you can do about it. You shouldn't do anything, try to do anything about it. But you may be most likely you're dealing with a child who has a narcissistic parent. So keep that in mind. And when you hear little kids say that, it's always all about Mom. Keep an eye on that mom, especially if you're friends with them. Psychopaths are fascinating, but narcissists are just as fascinating if you get up in it. A lot of stuff you can learn about narcissism in books and on videos if you watch the right things on YouTube and you learn from the right people who have valid information that isn't incorrect and isn't incomplete. So you've got to make sure you know who you're getting your information from. You got to check them out. But I think narcissists are fascinating. You would too if you get into it and learn where they're coming from and how that works, because you can actually control them like they control other people. You can control the narcissist if you look at it as just an ego. Told that story on here a few videos back about where I'd bet someone I could make this narcissist, this hardcore narcissist, just wait on me hand and foot. And they did. And all I did was treat them like an ego. So you have to know how to brush up against it at the right time to settle it down and get to do things you want to do. And you're manipulating it. It's horrible to think you're manipulating a human. But if you don't like that human because of that personality type, and you see you do these little things that will control you, go, oh, okay, I see what's happening here. One of the things I think is fascinating as well is when you see narcissists grouped together, not like in a nest, but they'll hang out together, because there'll be one that's like the king or queen of the narcissist group. Just say a famous person, an actor, a musician, that kind of thing. And that's your level 1 narcissist. That's up here at the top. Then these little level 2s are feeding off of that narcissist by telling everyone else how they hang out with that narcissist. Nobody knows this famous person is a narcissist because you probably don't know him well. Most people don't know him well. And most people don't want to say a person's a narcissist because they're probably paying their, mortgages by working for them. They're getting paid, right? But you see all these little second-tier narcissists, which fascinate me to no end, because they are narcissists as well. And they're just as bad as the one at the top, but they know enough to know that they've got to be cool about it. And they use that narcissist not in person, but they'll go out and tell people, oh, this is one of my great friends. You probably know. And it'll be one of the first things out of their mouth. First 15 or 20 minutes you meet them, that's when they're going to tell you that they're friends, this famous person. And they'll take on this air of, that's who I hang with and stuff. But that's a narcissist feeding off another narcissist. It's fascinating, if you get into it. Because there's the third tier that's right below that, which is doing the same thing as the second tier, but they don't have as much power because the second tier narcissist isn't as potent socially. I'm not going to get into that deep either, because we'll be here talking about it forever. Are there psychopaths like Bundy, Ramirez, and Dahmer still out there? We're on a psychopath jag. Yeah. They are. There's still some out there, not just some. There are probably quite a few of those, but they just haven't been caught yet. You can, these days, after you may watch a lot of true crime stuff. I don't watch a whole lot of true crime. It's not, doesn't, dealing with a channel with a behavior panel. Most of our thing is about true crime, but none of us sit around and watch true crime shows, except Greg when he's trying to find something interesting for us to watch. Or if something pops up on my YouTube feed, I'll watch it if it's good. Interesting. With the way social media is today and YouTube and everything, you can watch these videos and see what that person did. And you can see what didn't work for them and what did work for them. And these psychopaths will take that information and they'll add it to their protocol of how they're other people, right? So that's there are a bunch of them out there. I got to watch my mouth on this. I got to watch what I'm saying. But there are a bunch of them out there. Do psychopaths have a common tell or behavior? No, they don't. Usually it's pretty tough to quote unquote spot one when you're out in the wild. It's different if you're in an interrogation situation and this person is being questioned about some horrible things. That's one of the first things you're going to look for. But if you're out in the world in the wild and talking to people, they're hard to spot because they're very pleasant and never put your guard up, or not very often does it put your guard up. And they don't really have anything that they'll do or say right out of the gate. They'll be really nice most of the time. They'll be fairly charismatic most of the time. So you'll like them most of the time. That's what they do. They want you to like them. That's their bag, man. They want you to like them. So they'll do things that will inflate your ego. See, one of the great things about understanding psychopathy and what narcissists are and how they act is this. When you're dealing with a narcissist, quite often somebody will get in a relationship with one, let's say. And that narcissist just pummels them with love and, just how wonderful they are. And they're pumping that ego up and they're giving you all these things that fire off the oxytocin in your brain. That's what makes you bond with someone, makes you feel good and everything looks great and you like being around them, right? Then what they do is this. They cut it off. They turn off that little supply for you. And what you do is you keep following them and you're going, hey, wait a minute. I thought I was a great person. You don't say it out loud, but you're thinking, I'm a great person. I like being around them. And they cut it off. And every now and then, as you follow them, they'll throw out one little, like a little breadcrumb of it, of how great you are or something nice. So you get that little shot of dopamine, a little thing of oxytocin. And that's going to make you feel good, And you'd be like, oh, okay, it's still cool. Everything's good. It's never the same again after that. Unless they get in a whole lot of trouble. They're trying to fix it with you. Then they'll just love bomb you and give you all of that dopamine and oxytocin, all those little rushes of that your brain wants, because you get used to it and you like it. We all like dopamine. Yeah, everybody likes that when something happens and you go, yeah, TikTok, Instagram, all that stuff. That's what those videos are about. That's how they keep your attention. Because when you go on to one, you feel like you've learned something. You're like, yeah, and you go to the next one, it's funny. You go, yeah. Your brain goes, hey, man, we like this. Keep doing this. So that's what happens. That's how they keep you coming back. And you see that person who keeps trying to hang on to the narcissist. That's why they're doing it, because they're addicted to that feeling. And that's where they were getting a bunch of it, but now they're not getting much at all. They're just throwing out little parts of it. And so they just keep following them. So keep that in mind. If you're doing that, heads up, be careful. So, but no, they psychopaths don't have specific cues or tells that they'll fire off to let you know if they are a psychopath. No. But when you ask questions, you'll be able to tell if they're glib. By glib, I mean they answer questions. They may not know the answer. And maybe you're in situations where they're just making it up, but they want to sound like they know what's happening. There won't be much to it. It'll be very thin, no depth to it at all. But they'll tell you what they think they know about it and make it sound important. That's being glib. So you got to watch for those answers to questions. There's a whole bunch of things you look for, especially when they're being too nice. We've talked about that on here before. When they're being too nice and you go away and you think, that was wonderful, but why do I feel weird? That's a heads up for you right there. So start paying attention to those little things, those feelings when you leave someone. If you felt great about meeting them and all that, pay attention to how you feel 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes later, and what you think about them later that day, especially if you're a woman, because women put that stuff together. They gather a whole lot more information than us guys do. They can catch a lot of it. So you'll be the ones that feel had the biggest feeling of something not being right, or it's kind of odd, but something's just not right there. You don't know what it is, but your brain knows what it is, and slowly but surely you'll figure it out. But it takes a while sometimes. So if you know somebody that's chasing those little dopamine crumbs, try to give them a heads up what's happening. If you're doing it, again, you're going to make it's decision time at this point. What is the first move a psychopath makes? That's a great question. Okay, here you go. The first move that a psychopath will make is this. They're going to try to make you like them a lot. And that's the way you'll feel when you meet one. You'll feel like you've met a kindred spirit, somebody you can't believe you've lived your whole life without meeting this person up to this point. Okay? Here's how they do it. They will mimic you. Not like every move you make as in matching and mirroring, but they will match you. And by that, I mean they will say what you say. They'll use the style of words you use. If you use a lot of big words, they're going to use a lot of big words. And they're going to use words similar to the words you're using when you talk. They're going to listen to you for a few minutes, and they're going to figure out what kind of personality type and style you are. And they're going to copy that. And you're going to be seeing you in that person. So that's what you want to look for. In other words, you want to look for you in that person. Sounds weird, sounds odd and crazy, but that's what you're looking for. As you talk about music, listen to what they talk about, music styles that you talk about. Do they absolutely love them too? When you talk about plays, they may not know anything about plays. They'll give you a glib answer about a play or plays. So, but you'll still feel like that they're into it. And we have something in common. So far, you got two things in common, music and plays. It happens quickly, but they'll be mirroring your body language as well. Not heavily, not like when you do this, they're going to do that too. Automatically, they'll ease into it, but they're going to figure out what kind of personality type and style you are. And they're going to copy that, and they're going to show you that, because basically you're seeing yourself in them. and it's all the information they pick up from you in those first few minutes they talk to you, watch how much they listen. Pay attention to how much the person listens to you. Then once you recognize that the person's listening to you, listen to what they start talking about. That's what you need to look for. You need to look for you in that person, okay? Because they're just going to be reflecting what you give them. In other words, they're collecting it, moving it around, structuring it a little bit differently, and then giving it back to you. So you feel like there's a connection there. It's really important. I know it's a little tough to get your head around. That's the way they do it. That's the first move of a psychopath, is they'll be you. You'll see and hear you in that person. So that's what you want to look for. Very important. Can you please describe the two different kinds of psychopaths, born versus made, and tell us what makes each of them the way they are, and also teach us how to recognize one as soon as you meet them. All right. So this is the psychopath versus the sociopath. We've talked about this on here before, so hang with me. But somebody asked me, so I got to answer it. The difference in a psychopath and a sociopath is this. In real life, there are no sociopaths, right? In real life, there are no psychopaths. The DSM says that it's antisocial behavior for what we now call the psychopath. And we call them psychopaths because they're in the limbic system. There's these little things called the amygdala, and those aren't working properly. Several parts of the limbic system aren't working with a psychopath, but that's the big one, is the amygdala. And that's what one of the things that let you have empathy and sympathy for someone. You know, sympathy being, I feel sorry that person has to go to walk through the rain and do those kind of things. Or whatever the sad thing is. The person who's being empathetic will say, oh gosh, I feel bad for them because it's cold. I know they're freezing. It's all wet and stuff. That's hard. The empathetic person can feel the way that person feels. They can imagine what that's like, right? Whereas the psychopath can't do that. But they don't have the ability, they don't have the equipment that enables them to be empathetic for a person. That's why they can be so mean. That's why it doesn't bother them to do some of the horrible, horrid, horrific things they do to people, because it means nothing to them. The world looks like a bunch of insects to them, or little robots, or a video game. It's nothing to them because they don't have the equipment in their brain that lets them feel those feelings, that allows them to have those feelings. So they have no earthly idea what those feelings are. If I said to you, don't you feel Lurlink about that? You say, Lurlink? No, I don't. What's Lurlink? It doesn't exist. Lurlink, the feeling of Lurlink doesn't exist. So you don't feel, nobody feels it. But that's the way it is with empathy, with a psychopath. They feel Lurlink. They don't know what it is. They don't know what empathy is. They can't imagine what that's like because they don't have the equipment that lets them understand it or imagine how that feels. They can't do it. Sympathy either. They don't feel sorry for them either, but they don't have the empathy. That's the main thing. Which, keeping in mind the narcissist, remember, all psychopaths are narcissists, but not all narcissists are psychopaths. Very important. All psychopaths are narcissists, but not all narcissists are psychopaths. You have the clinical narcissist, what I refer to them as, because they're right up there next to a psychopath, right? They still have enough empathy, but they won't do horrible things. They'll treat people horribly. They'll do terrible things. They'll treat people that love them horribly. They'll treat their children horribly, but they won't kill them. They'll do other horrible things. Quite often they'll kill them, but they're not what we call the classic or clinical psychopath, in other words. So, but you can be such a hardcore narcissistic, clinical narcissist, you can get right up next to psychopathy without being a psychopath. Everything will read fairly normal on your fMRI when they take a look at your head and take a look at your brain, right? Now, sociopath, when they're little, they're born with the equipment. They've got to make their amygdala. We got both of them. Everything's humming right along. Everything's working just fine. But as they grow up, there's nobody there to nurture those feelings, the emotions for them, right? This is a sociopath. Sociopaths always, most of the time, they end up just being hardcore criminals. They go to jail early, prison early. They'll kill somebody violently. It'll be the one person. They won't be a serial killer or anything like that. They'll just get mad and fight somebody and kill them. either by accident or on purpose. Usually they'll stab them. Quite often it'll be a stabbing, or they'll just beat them to death, right? Well, this is getting hardcore up in here. But that person, when they were raised, their parents didn't show them any love or much love at all. They were mean to them. They saw their father being violent with their mother, and their mother being violent with their father. If there's a situation where their parents may have been mean to animals and the whole thing, and they never saw what being loving or being a caring person looked like. They have no earthly idea what that's like. They see other people doing it and they don't understand why. They may feel sorry for a little bird or a little mouse or something that befriends them somehow, let's say, or a dog or a cat or something, but usually that doesn't even happen. But they're the person, and they're like I said before, their brain will read fairly normal, fairly normal, because they've got all the equipment that they need as far as the limbic system goes. Neurologically, they're sound, but they're just horrible people because they were raised in a horrible environment most of the time. That's the reason for it most of the time. So that's the difference. You've got a person who can't feel empathy, and then who's the psychopath. They're born that way. Psychopath is born a psychopath unless they have an accident or do some drug or something that destroys their amygdala. If they get hit in the head or in a car wreck or some kind of accident that messes their brain up, that's one thing. But they're still a psychic. You can still be a psychopath from then on. You've heard stories about people when they were young, they're normal, everything's fine. They got hit by a car and they were never the same again, and they got mean, or they just didn't care about people anymore after that. That's usually what's happened. Or quite often that's the case is what's happened. When they turn that hardcore from one type of personality to that type of personality. Once they were kind and loving and all that, now they're not anymore. So that's an example that does happen, but that could be part of that could happen. So the sociopath, when they're growing up, again, they don't get anything. They don't get anything. Nothing nurtures those emotions. So that part of the brain doesn't develop as well. It's horrible when that happens. But it happens all the time. There are plenty of them out there, plenty of psychopaths and sociopaths. As you're seeing, if you'll watch the news for 3 minutes, you see a lot of them are politicians. No kidding. So, and yeah, but think about it. When you think about politicians, what kind of mindset do you have to have to want to be a politician? Think about it. And think of the things that these people do and the way not all of them, some are great people and most of them are just fine. But there's several in there that aren't just fine at all. So because of the things they do. And you'll see other politicians in other countries who are just horrible people who do horrible things to a lot of people, So you see that quite often when these leaders of other countries are just psychopaths because of the things they do. Things they've done. So anyway, don't want to get political. But quite often the psychopath wants to have a position of power. The ultimate power is being the president. Well, that's the most powerful person in the world. If you're not the president, you want to be somewhere else in the government because you have power and you rule over people, Or you want to be and on lower levels, some of them may want to be a police officer. Some, they may even be the doorman. Anything to give them some kind of power, or they'll be a preacher or a priest or somebody in the quote unquote clergy, So because they want a position of power, psychopaths have to have that. They love it. They want to be in charge of stuff. They want to be able to boss people around. They want to be in charge. They want to be the person who has power. So they end up in a lot of interesting, but that's why a lot of CEOs, they found out, not all of them, not 50% of them, anything like that, but more often, no, I'm not going to say more often than not, that's not true. There are a lot of psychopaths that are CEOs because of the way they have to treat the people that work for this company like, little playing pieces, little pieces of a game. And they do it quite often, no problem with it whatsoever. So that's and the studies on that were started, I think, in the 80s. I think I'm telling you right. Don't quote me on that. But that's when they started finding out they were or suspecting that CEOs, for some reason, and we know the reason, were psychopaths or hardcore clinical narcissists because of the things they had to do and the things they did for that company. And there's a book called Snakes in Suits. I'll explain this perfectly to you. Robert Hare, Dr. Robert Hare, is the guy who wrote it. And somebody else wrote it with him. I can't remember who the other author was. But he's like the Michael Jackson of psychopathy and bringing it to the forefront for it. So everyone can, it's one of the reasons that you are interested in psychopathy if you are, or in psychopaths, because he's the one that said, you know what? Here's what I've learned about psychopaths. Here's everything I know. He did studies on them forever, right? And he's written a couple of books. Without Conscience, that's one to check out. That's one to get. If you're into psychopathy at all, Psychopaths Without Conscience, Robert D. Hare. Get that one. And then Snakes in Suits, because that talks about the CEOs and how they think that's what caused the big economic crash a while back. So look into that. If you're fascinated at all by psychopaths and business, Snakes in Suits, get that. Check that out. That's what I'd suggest. What's another good one? Yeah, you can't go wrong with those two. Robert Hare's the guy for that. So that's the difference in a psychopath and a sociopath. Is it possible for a person that does not have the genes for psychopathy to learn to teach themselves not to be fazed by things that would normally make anyone else uncomfortable in order to seem like someone not to be messed with? It's a long question. It's a little confusing. I see what you're saying, but there are no genes for psychopathy. As far as we know, there is a theory that's out there that says it can be passed down, and not everybody gets it, like balding, or the red hair gene, or something like that. But there's no gene that's been isolated that says, oh, that kid's going to be a psychopath when they grow up. Yeah. So, and you can't. In other words, you can't fix a psychopath. So if the person tries to look normal and do all that, there's no way you can get past that. Now, psychopaths will try to look normal. They will copy you. They'll imitate you so close that sometimes it's actually scary because they don't understand what it looks like when someone's becoming emotional. When I get on here and I get all worked up and they can't do that. Can't do it because they don't know how. Right? They don't have the feelings, in other words, for that to happen. The brain doesn't work properly. I won't go into the whole psychopath thing, which I go into. It seems like every show here about how the brain functions with psychopaths. However, they will try to copy it, and you'll see them copy other people's emotions that they see because they don't understand what those emotions are they're seeing, but they know they got to have them. And they figure this out when they're younger, in their early 20s. They go, I'm different than everybody else. What's going on? And they'll see a big upheaval of emotion, be it anger, be it happiness, or someone who's really confused and has a little emotional. They may cry, or from a breakup or something, and they'll imitate those things. It's bizarre when you see them do it. I actually had a guy do that to me once. I've told that, like I was saying, I've told that on here before, so I won't tell it again. But it's pretty weird, man. It's pretty weird when they do that, but that's the way they do it. So they will try to imitate you. They will try to use other people's expressions because they don't know what their body language when they're feeling an emotion. So they'll look quirky for a couple of years. It'll be kind of odd, But once they get it down, man, you can't tell it's fake quite often. You're going to be able to. Keep watching this stuff, I promise you'll be able to. But right now, you probably won't be able to. But you will. You'll be able to see it. When my ex-husband was mad at me, he would stare a hole in my head when I would go sit down. Is that the psychopathic stare? Okay. I had somebody like that in the 4th grade, this cat named Mark, right? And he sat one row over and about 3 seats back. And he would stare at me like I was a Vietnamese sniper working a tree line. He was always like, just looking at me. It was really weird. And so when I got older and started learning about psychopaths, as anybody who starts getting psychopathy, they think everybody's a psychopath. When I was 22, I guess from 22 to about 24, everybody was a psychopath because I learned just enough to scare the out of myself that everybody was one. Couldn't put it in context because I hadn't dealt with enough of them at that point, or where I knew that's what they were. So I thought everybody was. So you got to be careful with that. But here's the bottom line on the psychopathic stare, okay? Because that's not what that was. Everybody thinks the psychopathic stare is like that thing we talked about a minute ago at the beginning, okay? Where it's this real evil look and all that. That's not it. That's not it. I don't care what anybody tells you. I'm telling you what this is. Listen to what I'm telling you. This is the psychopathic stare they're talking about, okay? It happens in a couple of different ways. The main one you're going to see is this. For example, if you're at a coffee shop, if you're at Starbucks, or if you're at the store, you're at a grocery store, somewhere like that, or in a bar somewhere, or you're out eating in a restaurant, and somebody looks at you and they're staring at you and they don't stop. If you were to stare at me, if I saw you out somewhere and I didn't know you and you started looking at me, and I looked over at you, automatically you're going to look at me for a second, then you're going to look away because it makes you feel weird. And it probably makes them feel weird, right? Because you just got busted staring at them, right? A psychopath has a problem in their limbic system where the amygdala don't function properly. That is just a very small part that show you that person's a psychopath, because the amygdala are either missing, they're not functioning correctly, or they're damaged. Okay, there are two little things. They're about the size of almonds in your brain. They're part of the limbic system, and those are the things that help you feel empathy. Again, when you're talking about psychopathy, it's not just that. It's the entire brain isn't connecting the way it should. Okay, you have the frontal lobe, the parietal lobes, all kinds of parts of the brain, and they're not connecting properly. Okay, so keep in mind, here it is. The psychopath doesn't have the equipment to be able to feel empathetic. They can't feel what you feel. They can't imagine you feeling odd or feeling weird. If you hit your hand or your thumb or your finger with a hammer, they don't go, "Oh, I bet that hurt." They can't do that. They can act that way, but in reality, they can't put themselves in your position and feel that. No empathy there at all whatsoever. Not even a little bit. I don't care what anybody tells you. Listen to me. Now, the psychopathic stare, what happens is when they're looking at you like that, like if you were looking at me and you saw me look at you and you didn't look away because it didn't make you feel weird at all, that's the psychopathic stare. Elizabeth Holmes, when she would talk to people, she would sit there and just look at them and not blink much because it didn't bother her to do that. It didn't bother her to keep staring at somebody. Now, she could have been doing that on purpose. I don't know if she's a psychopath or not. She sure looks like one, and the things she did sure set off a lot of red flags for me. But I don't know if she is or not. Never talked to her, haven't interviewed her, anything. So that's what it is. It's that stare that lasts too long when it should be uncomfortable and they should look away, and they don't. That's the psychopathic stare. It's not some big scary face they make and, "Oh, I saw they're going to do this and he looked at me mean." No, that's not it. It makes sense that's what it would be because you got a psychopath. Everybody thinks they're always mean, and if you gave them a knife, they'd run around and stab everybody in the whole room. No. It's just they look too long because they don't know it makes you uncomfortable because it doesn't make them uncomfortable. That's why they keep looking. Sometimes it's just a blank face, like, just looking at you. It could be just a blank stare almost. It's important to remember all that. So somebody says, "He was looking at me like a psychopath." The person might have been mean or mad. Shoot, they may be a psychopath. I don't know. Maybe thinking about what they're going to do. I don't know. But the true classic psychopathic stare is what I just described to you. Okay? They can't feel the empathy that would tell them to stop looking or to look away. That's what it is. That's the bottom line. So that's the psychopathic stare. If you saw the series Dexter, which I was fascinated by, do you think the main character Dexter did a good job rather than a bad job playing a psychopath? You know what I thought about that? And I thought about this when I saw that show, because the very first episode, I was like, "Oh man, somebody's done a show about a real psychopath. Here we go." Because if you watch the first episode in the first 2 minutes, he's on this boat going out in the ocean, and he's talking, he's saying everything you should say. He's thinking everything you should think if he was a psychopath. Everything you go and you accept is that, wow, if you were a person who understood psychopathy, which you do now, and you'd say, yeah, guy's a psychopath. Here we go. This is going to be good. And he seemed to do all these crazy things, right? That are horrible that he does. But when you think about what's happening and you really pay attention, you know he's not. Here's how you know. So we talk about this all the time on here, as you know. Psychopaths can't have feelings for other people. A true clinical psychopath. You can have a person can have a psychopathic episode, I guess, but he cared about his sister. He got mad when people would be mean to children and make children disappear, that kind of thing. And that's the people he would attack. Or if they were mean to a woman, he would attack them because he felt for that woman or he felt for that child, right? Think about it. Or his sister. So, and think about it as well. What they show you is why he's like he is, why he's a quote unquote psychopath, because I'm not going to say it on here because it's too graphic, but it was a situation where he and his sister were in this, I think it was the back of a truck or something like that. It was enclosed and there were a lot of people in there that weren't alive anymore. That's out. And it was pretty gory too. So, and they were in there for a few days and supposedly that turned him into a psychopath. Doesn't work that way. We know that because we know psychopathy is caused, or the clinical narcissist or the clinical psychopath is born, not raised, not nurtured. It's nature, not nurture, right? So you could say the guy's a quote unquote sociopath. You know, I always say there are no sociopaths. They're just hardcore criminals. You know, the highest form of malignant narcissist you can get. That's what a quote unquote sociopath is. They're just usually hardcore criminals. They go to prison early, they get killed early, most of the time, that kind of thing. So, no, I don't think he was a psychopath. That first episode, I was like, yeah, this looks good. And then about a third of the way through, I was like, hey, wait a minute, man, this isn't right. Something's not right here. Why did you say that? And then as I watched a few more, it's kind of let down, you know, because it looked like it was going to be a fantastic show, you know, series. But it was a bummer, you know, because they were presenting him as one and he wasn't. How do you tell someone they're likely a psychopath? Well, I don't know because I never do that. And there's no situation where I've ever had to tell somebody that they're a psychopath. And that's for a psychiatrist, a psychologist, you know, that world. And I'm not in that world. Okay. But in my situation, I want to know if they are or not. But it's not my business to tell them what I think about that, if it's my opinion they are or if they aren't. Because I don't know. I'm not a doctor, not a psychiatrist, not a psychologist. Yeah, I've read a lot of stuff in both of those worlds, but no, I'm not deeply educated in that. And there's no reason to tell the person you're talking to they're a psychopath. That's just going to make them mad or freak them out. And if you're wrong, why would you tell them in the first place? You know, if it's an interrogation and out in the real world, you might be mad and tell somebody that. Of course, they'll blow it off and tell everybody you're crazy because you called them that. So I don't really see any spot for me to be saying that or for a reason to tell somebody that. So I never have, and I probably never will. So I don't know. I don't know how you'd tell them. Sorry. I know you've said before that psychopaths don't really have feelings or emotions like other people. You've used the expression, there's nobody in there. What do you mean by that? Well, when you have a true psychopath, like a clinical psychopath, there's nobody in there. It's just a body running around trying to please itself because their brain isn't working properly, right? It can't have any feelings or emotions for you except anger. And that's why I say there's nobody in there. It's just a body running around. It's empty. No moral compass, no nothing. They fascinate me, don't get me wrong, but don't like them, not at all. What does it mean when someone gazes at you for too long? Okay, it depends on where you are, what the situation is, and who you're dealing with. So to figure out who you're dealing with, let's say you're in, let's say you're in a bar, okay, and you see somebody, you just notice somebody looking at you. Usually when you're looking at someone from across the room, you know, and they look at you, they'll look away. A few more minutes, they'll look back, and they'll keep talking and doing what they're doing. Then they'll look back, and you're kind of, hey, what's going on? You know, Then maybe they'll send you a drink or whatever it is that goes on in bars and stuff now. So if that person doesn't break eye contact with you, if they don't stop looking at you, quite often women go, oh, he's taken with me, or, this guy's into me, and guys will do the same thing. Oh, she's into me. What's happening quite often is this. We talked about psychopaths earlier, right? You may be looking at a psychopath looking at you, because when you deal with a psychopath, remember, they don't have empathy. Their amygdala, the part of the brain, which does so many more things than this, but one of the most important things it does is, put this down, is help you with emotions. That's how you feel. It's one of the things that enable you to feel sympathy, empathy, things like that. So when someone's staring at you for that long, if you start looking at somebody for that long, it becomes uncomfortable, especially if you don't know them. So you look away because it's uncomfortable, right? But if they keep looking at you, the psychopath doesn't know that makes you uncomfortable because it's not making them uncomfortable, and it should. Think about this now, what we're talking about, okay? It's that long stare. If they don't look away, or you're talking to someone and they just keep looking at you like this and don't let go of that eye contact when they should, and you start feeling uncomfortable, and so much so that you're afraid you can't hardly look away because you feel like they're staring a hole in your head, even when you're close, watch out. They may be fine. May not be anything wrong with them. They may be from, like I said earlier, when in another video, in the video before this, I think, when you're dealing with body language, one of the first things you've got to decide is what you're seeing in body language. Is this something that's cultural or something that's limbic? Is this person acting this way because of where they're from and where they live in another country, from another culture, and where that's normal? Or are you seeing this behavior happen because it's something firing off neurologically? Okay, that's one of the first things you need to think about when you start observing body language properly. Okay, so if someone's looking at you and they don't break eye contact, be careful. I'm not saying tell everybody, this guy's probably a psychopath, and we'll quit looking at him. The guy might really like you. He might think you're the most beautiful thing in the world and just can't quit looking at you, But if he keeps looking at you and won't break eye contact with you, heads up. Can you see the psychopathic stare in pictures? I know a couple of people who in pictures, even when smiling, they have this eerie look in their eye, almost like a blank stare, but it's not. It's almost scary looking even when they're smiling. Is this the psychopathic stare? We've gone over the psychopathic stare quite often on here. And no, that's not the psychopathic stare. The psychopathic stare happens by accident. They don't know they're doing it. They have no idea they're doing that. Do you know why? Because when a person's looking at you at a bar or a restaurant or whatever from across the room, they keep looking at you as you look at them and they don't look away. You know how that makes you uncomfortable when somebody does that to you? It doesn't make them uncomfortable. Doesn't make them uncomfortable because they don't have the proper equipment in their brain to make that work. Okay? A psychopath. So that's the psychopathic stare. It happens by accident. The parietal lobes and the frontal lobe, those things aren't connected properly. The amygdala aren't functioning properly, or they're missing, along with those other problems as well. But the brain isn't connecting properly, to make a long story short. So they don't feel any empathy. So they don't know what it's like to feel that way. They don't know that it's kind of weird to keep looking. They won't look away. Try staring at somebody in public. Just look at them too long. When they look at you, see how long it takes you to look away, because it's really uncomfortable. But psychopaths don't feel that. They don't have that feeling. They don't get it because their brain doesn't work properly. So they don't have the proper equipment to let them feel those feelings. I hope I got that across, because we talk about it all the time on here. People are all the time asking about it. And I see it in the comments, and they're still not straight on that, sure about how that works. But that's what it is. It happens by accident. They don't even realize they're doing it. It's not a mean face or some eerie looking thing. No, they're just looking at you. That's a psychopathic stare. Facial similarities in male psychopaths. The jawline is long and distinctive. For example, Ed Kemper, Richard Ramirez, and Aaron Campbell. Have you ever noticed that? You know what? No. People have facial features, and there are people who look mean, who aren't mean, that kind of thing. For psychopaths, the problem is not it's a neurological problem. It has nothing to do with the way your face is, your facial features. There's no study in the world on the planet that shows that's true. You'll see people who aren't scientists or are not from universities or aren't in the medical business that have said things, you know, that I think this or this is what happens when it means that. Doesn't mean anything. You're talking about a neurological situation with a psychopath, the amygdala specifically, you know, the limbic system. That has nothing to do with facial features. It has nothing to do with the way you look, good, bad, or ugly. Nothing at all. So no, there's no correlation between the way someone looks, if their ears are set low or set high, or their eyes are further apart than somebody else's, or their nose is big or normal sized. Because it's I don't want to say crazy talk because a lot of people are into that. I'm not slamming anybody at all. I'm just saying there's no correlation between that and psychopathy, someone's facial features. That's a good question, but I've heard that before, and it's just it bothers me that so many people think it's true. It looks like a psychopath. Some people do though, man. They look just like a psychopath. They get those eyes up because they get a look on their face, and you go, "Wow, that guy's crazy," or "She's nuts." And so they look like them, you know. Plus the classic psychopath you've seen in movies and TV shows. But there's no correlation in facial features and psychopathy. Not one. Not even a little one. So no, I wouldn't count on that at all. But when you go through and you look at the eyes and you go, well, the eyes are other, it's just the way they hold their eyes a little bit wide. Sometimes some of them. Most psychopaths, you never know they're psychopaths, and they don't either. Because they haven't been raised in a violent environment or an environment that's odd, and they've never been exposed to a lot of violence, a lot of them, but they still have the clinical narcissist traits to them quite often. Some of them never have any idea that's what's going on. They're just getting along society and everything's fine. They always try to put themselves in a position of power, though. So look at that. That's what the studies show. But when a normal old person, quote unquote, is discovered to be a psychopath, and they're like, I don't know either. They are most likely from what the fMRI tells us. You know, I'm sure they've had a study. That's how they know. You know, somebody's done a study on them. But you know, there are no facial features with that. Scott, have you seen any actors or musicians or authors, without naming names, that make you feel like there's some sociopathy or psychopathy going on there? I see these people and I just get that feeling. Now, what are your thoughts? And again, not naming names. Who would they be? Or, yeah, I'm not going to. I see what you're saying now. All right, is there anybody I think that's a sociopath or a psychopath? Like I told you before, I'm not in the whole sociopath thing. Sociopaths are just hardcore criminals. You know, it's like psychopath light. You know, it's like the sociopath is really the psychopath, but they have feelings and their amygdala are intact and the brain is still communicating properly amongst the lobes and everything going on in there. So for me, that's what that's what sociopathy, quote unquote, is. And you know, that term is just used because it makes psychopathy seem less as horrible. So they don't say he's a psychopath, he's a sociopath. You know, it's just, and this is just happening over there. And psychopath, like I've said before, it's not even in the DSM-5. So that's not even a real term either. It's just one that we all use. You know, everyone uses. So anyway, there's nobody I know like that. I mean, there were some people I went to school. I went to Berklee College of Music in Boston. And I met one or two people I thought were kind of at school. I thought were kind of weird, you know, but I don't know any. There are some people that act a little odd that are artists and singers. You know, I noticed when Winona Judd, she talks about herself in the third person. So I always say, Winona would never do this, or Winona would, and I've just seen her do that on TV. You know, I think she was on a talk show. First time I heard her say that. And Al Green talks about himself in the third person. If you don't know who Al Green is, he's one of the greatest singers ever walked the planet. Awesome, love him. Al would always say, Scott, want to smoke a cigarette with Al? And I'd be, yeah. I'll smoke a cigarette with Al. I always talk to him like in the third person too. So it's kind of weird. That's back when I smoked, when I went to Berkeley. I think I was out of Berkeley at that time. Still lived in Boston. I was a session guy. And he says, Scott, want to go get some food with Al? I'd be like, yeah, Scott wants to go with that. Because I started doing it too. I was like, yeah, Scott will go with Al to get some food. Let's go. And there's this place called Bob the Chef's in Boston. It was the best soul food. I don't know if you've ever had soul food before. Oh my gosh, it was so good. So good. Oh, Bob the Chef's. I don't know if it's still there. I'm going to go back and see. Next time I'm in Boston, I'm going to look it up and see. Man, that was good. If you're there, look up Bob the Chef's. So the second part is how are some young kids able to do brutal crimes? When little kids, other kids, or people, their sister, their mother, something like that. When they're really young, quite often you're dealing with a psychopath. Not all the time, but quite often you are. You've seen us talk about some of those on the behavior panel. They did things when they were younger, but they're in prison now or in juvenile detention and all that. And we talk about those interviews they've done with them. And that's usually what we're dealing with, most of the time is a psychopath. And it's easy to say, oh, it's a psychopath because he did that. Sometimes they're not. And people say, I can spot a psychopath. You can't spot a psychopath. I don't care who you are. I don't care what somebody's told you. You can't. Can't spot them. Can't spot them. Sometimes it takes 6 months or a year to diagnose one properly. So keep that in mind. There's a lot that goes into that. You've got the, Robert Hare's psychopath test that you can run through and get a pretty good idea what you're dealing with as far as and the empathy the person may have. That's not definitive as far as being a psychopath goes. A lot of people think it is. It isn't. It takes a while. You can do it with fMRI. Take a look at the brain. You can do it with that. And quite often those people who do show up as a psychopath on fMRI studies, they don't do anything that's bad or wrong. They're normal people. They don't do anything bad at all. So it takes a while to diagnose one properly for a clinical psychopath. After taking the psychopath test, I want to know how if a supposed psychopath is giving an honest answer. Well, just like you would anybody else. You look at their body language and you look for cues that would show. Now, a psychopath, I know why you're asking this, because a psychopath, their stress level is very low, if at all, right? But still, their brain's going to say, shouldn't say this, man. We've got to think about something else. So it's mostly as they create the answer that when you ask them something, the answer they're structuring, creating things like that, you'll see that stuff on them. Because as they think, they may back up a little bit, may look around a little bit too much, and think about it. It's okay if they break eye contact, as we've talked about on here before, because when someone's lying to you, their brain wants to keep an eye on you to make sure you believe them. So if somebody starts looking around and thinking, that's fine. However, you can tell there's a lot going on because you're going to look for their illustrators and see what they're doing. If they've been talking a lot with their hands, been doing their head like this a lot, and those things disappear and they get fairly still, or the person that you're talking about gets fairly still, well, there could be some deception going on there because everything has stopped moving. Remember, we talked about Aldert Vray, and how his study showed that illustrators just almost disappear when you're being deceptive about things. And once, if you got a baseline and they're illustrating a lot, again, if somebody's watching this for the first time, illustrators are the way your brain emphasizes specific words and phrases. Like I did just then, specific words and phrases. So when those things disappear, if they've been there a lot and the person gets a little bit still and they start talking to you, then there you have it. Especially if they don't blink a lot or don't break eye contact with you. That's a cluster of cues there that would suggest, it indicates, it doesn't mean for sure that they're being deceptive. And that's why I always say, when you see something like that and you see a cluster like that and you go, oh, that might be deceptive. That might be a lie. So you have to ask questions around that. Whatever you're talking about at that moment, get some other questions around that thing and that are targeted to that thing the person got still on or didn't quit looking at you and stop blinking on. Okay, so questioning is so important. when you're trying to find out if somebody's lying to you. Most people try to make it seem like it's real easy. It is easy once you know how. Once you get into it and you practice and you rehearse and you see a lot of it out in the wild, that's one thing. But right out of the gate, you go, oh, look for these 3 things and you'll know they're lying. Or I saw somebody the other day on TikTok that was saying, if you do this, when you're saying yes, it's not congruent with what you're saying. No, it doesn't mean that at all. Because what this person was doing that they were showing was doing these, like we talk about as illustrating, as confirmations. No, they would say, yes, I'm going to do this. And it was, I'm going to do this. So every head move landed on a word. And that is confirmation. It's not saying no. If they were saying, do you want to do that? And they go, yes, I'd love to do that. And the head shakes back and forth a little bit and just keeps going after they're finished. That's one thing. That's most likely, that's a cue you can look at and say, oh, this might be deception. This might be a lie this person's telling me. They're being maybe deceptive. So you look around for other things telling you that as well. You got to really pay attention when it comes to deciding whether somebody's being deceptive or not. You can't, there's nothing that'll show you for sure the person is or isn't. So you have to look at clusters and then ask questions around it. Is there any psychopath, living or dead, that you would have loved to interview? Ooh. I don't know. Maybe Hitler. Yeah, nobody ever interviewed the guy, right? That's who I'd want to interview. That's who I'd want to talk to. See what just a mind that's blasted looks like, or how it reacts to. But I have to speak German. Let's pretend, since we're saying anybody living or dead, let's say we both speak English, or I can speak German and understand him perfectly. That's probably the guy I'd talk to, Hitler. Because I think we'd learn a lot from that. And I could write a paper or some studies on that, because I'd go in loaded for bear talking to that guy. I'd be ready. Yeah, I think Hitler would be a good one. I've been a physical therapist for almost 20 years, and I've never had a patient sneer at me. I've been working with this guy, I'm a female, who really freaked me out when he sneered at me, but I kept up my professionalism. I was picking up on crazy psychopath vibes from him. Is he a psychopath? I don't know. There's no way to tell just because somebody sneers at you. He might have been mad. Might be something wrong with him. You're a therapist, and you might have seen that later on, what was wrong with him. But just because somebody sneers at you doesn't mean they're a psychopath. If they're putting off psychopath vibes, well, that could just be their behavior that you understand to be psychopathy. Most of the time, psychopaths don't put off a vibe like that. You'd never know they were. Most of the ones you've met, you don't know they were. And you've met one, you just don't know it. They just weren't violent. They don't know it most of the time. They don't realize they're psychopaths. They don't sit around going, I'm a psychopath. That didn't happen. Doesn't. Never heard of it happening. I've heard people, I get email from people saying, I'm a psychopath and this and that and that. And they may be. They may have discovered they are, But I don't think that person would even sit around and that have emailed me and sit around and go, I'm a psychopath and worry about it or anything. I don't think and being that way, you wouldn't want anybody to know. And psychopaths are usually just the greatest person you think you've ever met. You just think they're so wonderful and so nice and so charming, and you can't believe you hadn't met this person before and all that. That's what they're usually like. Those are the people you need to look out for, not just somebody being nice to you, don't get me wrong. But if it's over the top, they're being aggressively nice. Yeah. You've met those people before, and you've met someone, you've hung out with them for a while. You've never met him before, but you met him that day or that night, and you hung out. And it was great. You had the best time. And then you go on your way, they go on theirs. Hey, we'll meet on Thursday or something. We'll do the, yeah, great. And about 20 minutes later, you go, why do I feel so weird? I don't know. Something about that just wasn't right. Because something about that wasn't right. Those are people you got to watch out for. So be careful around those. You won't know if you meet a psychopath. Unless one, how would you not know? Because they're jumping out of the bushes or whatever. But if you meet one in public, 99% of the time, you'll never know it. So that's one of the reasons they fascinate me. They sneak around like that. Thank you for providing the psychopath test for us to take. Were those questions your own adaptation of Hare's work or his own? If so, where did you source it? Where did you source it from? Yeah. Okay. Here's what the psychopath test was that we did on here a couple weeks ago. Okay. It's the hair psychopathy checklist is what it is. Google that. And there'll be different places you can get that. Okay. But don't just get it from somebody's, somebody, oh, here's the psychopath, checklist. The hair psychopathy checklist. That's what you want. Okay. Get that. Because what we did on there, and I explained it at the first, you don't ask those questions to a psycho or to anyone. You don't say, are you glib? Because they'll say, what? No, I'm not glib. Because a lot of people in the comments were like, well, why wouldn't a psychopath lie about these? Well, they would, as you would, if you were asked those questions and you didn't feel good about answering them or it made you sound bad. Okay. Yeah, of course, psychopath. Anybody would lie about some of those. Some of those are pretty personal, but you don't ask the questions like they're written out like that. That's the question you want answered, but you ask it in a different fashion. Okay. For example, if you want to find out if someone's glib, you don't ask them if they're glib. You ask them questions and you see how they answer them about things they probably wouldn't know about. And you see, and it's going to take more than one question to do that. I think we got it done in 20 minutes or something, 20, 25 minutes when we did it online, right? But keep in mind, you're just answering the question and then checking off a 0, 1, or a 2 in there. Sometimes it takes up to a year to properly diagnose someone who might be a psychopath, to diagnose one properly, okay? So, but when you're in interrogation or something, you don't ask questions in that fashion that they were on the test that we took, right, that we did online or a couple weeks ago. But you ask questions, you want to get that information that question is asking, but you ask questions around that question in different forms to get that information from them, okay? I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, let me know and I'll go even deeper into it. But yeah, there were Hare's questions, and not my own adaptation of them. That's exactly what's on the checklist. Okay, but you just have to ask them a specific way or different ways.